Well, everyone, I appreciate the fact that you were patiently waiting for 2 months for us to continue this study. It was Christmas time and a little busy, so we took a little time off. But now that we're back, the first thing I probably need to do is go over the things that we've covered so far. Commandment 1, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Now, it's obvious that the true meaning of this was that God is God and there are no other gods. But the term before me does create a few problems. It provides a loophole that has resulted in a lot of interesting debates. The New Testament makes it very clear that God is God and there are no other gods, period. Commandment 2 prohibits the making of idols and the worship of idols. Now, the Old Testament focuses primarily on golden calves or carved idols and statues. But the New Testament warns us that there are other kinds of gods, like wealth, are those things that represent wealth, status, position, rank, pleasures of the flesh. These things can replace God, and the New Testament warns us not to allow those things to replace God in our lives. Commandment 3, taking the name of God in vain. Now, part of doing that is cussing, but that's not all of what taking God's name in vain is. Anytime we use God to enhance ourselves, our image, our personal wealth, our power, our creditability, or any kind of personal gain, we're using God's name in vain. We're certainly not glorifying God, and the New Testament tells us that it's much better to leave God out of it completely if your saying is not praising God. Otherwise, you're taking the name of God in vain. Commandment 4, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Now, there is nothing wrong with honoring God and setting aside a time to give our attention to God. And that's what we do every Sunday when we gather to worship. Although we certainly need to give God a lot of attention during the week as well. But coming to church on Sunday is not keeping the Sabbath. You see, the Sabbath is not really a day. It's a set of codes, of do's and don'ts that have to be followed in a certain way, and often done at a certain time. So if you drive over 7/10 of a mile to get to church and then go home on a Sunday, you've violated the Sabbath day journey. If you cook any kind of meal on the Sabbath day, you violated the law against making fire on the Sabbath. In fact, if you start your car on the Sabbath, you violated the law against starting a fire. You see, it's not just going to church. It's abiding by all the restrictions and a bunch more. And also remember that the Sabbath is from sunset Friday to sunset on Saturday. It's not the first day of the week. First day of the week is called Sunday. As Christians, we're not commanded to follow the rules for the Sabbath, to keep the Sabbath. We are commanded to go to church and not neglect the assembly of the saints as is the habit of others. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25, which reads, not neglecting to gather together as is the habit of some, but encouraging each other, and all the more as the day approaches. That's Sunday. That's not the Sabbath. If there's any problems remembering what we went over, you can go back over the videos that were sent out before the Christmas break and review. And if you still have questions, you can contact me, and I will do what I can to answer them. Now let's move on to commandment number 5. Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 16. Honor your father and your mother, as the Lord your God commanded you, that your days may be prolonged, and that it may go well with you in the land which the Lord your God gives you. And Exodus 20:12 reads, honor your father and mother, that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God gives you. Slight difference in the wording. Context is basically the same. Remember that Exodus was the initial giving of the commandments. Deuteronomy is a paraphrase done several weeks before Moses' death. And there will be a little slight difference in the verbiage, but the context reads the same. Now, if we go to the book of Ephesians in the New Testament, chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, we read this. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in discipline and instruction of the Lord. Now note that Paul says this is the first commandment with a promise. Now, as I told you, the 10 commandments, the first 4 concern our relationship with God. The remaining 6 concern our relationship with each other. And commandment that we have just read, to honor your father and mother, says this is the first commandment that has a promise. The promise that you'll live long and prosperous on this earth. And indeed, honoring your father and mother is the right thing to do. They brought you into this world. They helped you out when you couldn't take care of yourself. They deserve respect. However, Jesus knew that there would be times when to do the right thing, you may have to go against the grain. Luke chapter 12, verses 51 through 53. Do you think that I have come to give peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. For henceforth in one house there will be 5 divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. The point being that following the commandments of God comes first, before anything else, and that means anything else. As Christians, we believe that our responsibility is for us, and on the day of judgment, we will stand before Jesus, and we will account for our lives, what we did and what we didn't do. Our mothers and fathers will not stand for us. Our brothers and sisters, our aunts and uncles will not stand for us. Each of us will stand for ourselves and give account of our life before the throne. Romans chapter 14, verses 11 and 12. For it is written, as I live, said the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall give praise. So each of us shall give account of himself to God. And Revelations, chapter 20, verses 11 through 15. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who sat upon it. From his presence earth and sky fled away. No place was found for them. I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Also another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books, by what they had done. And the sea gave up the dead in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead in them, and all were judged by what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. You see, as Christians, we are not held accountable for the sins of our fathers. Our fathers could have been a drunken, wife-beater, thief, liar, womanizer, among other things. That doesn't mean we're going to hell. We have to account for ourselves, our own doings, or things that we didn't do that we should have. And when the time comes, say a son or daughter wants to become a Christian, and the parent says no, it's going to create the division that Jesus is talking about. There will be a time when a decision will have to be made between doing what God wants you to do and doing what it's going to take to please others. And what Jesus was saying is, God comes first, even if it creates division. And Paul says basically the same thing. Specifically, he's talking about fathers, but it also applies as much to mothers. Not to provoke your children, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. In simple words, don't put them in a position where they have to decide between you and God. And we're not talking about, no, you're not going to drive the car for another 3 months after you were caught doing 60 through Crestwood at 2 o'clock in the morning. No, you're not going out on a weekday night on any dates until you get your grades back up in school. You know, that's parent things. That's things that parents need to handle. And unfortunately, in today's world, there's a lot of parents that don't handle that. What Paul is saying is that parents have a responsibility to their children to bring them up in the right way, to teach them the things they should know, and to instill in them discipline and the knowledge of the Lord and of right and of wrong. Children, honor your father, mother, grandfathers, grandmothers, aunts and uncles. But those people should never get in the way of doing the right thing. Honor and respect is a two-way street, with duties and obligations on both sides. Next time we'll move into Commandment 6, and in fact we're going to lump several of them together, as they are covered in the New Testament, basically lumped together. Until then, I hope that you enjoyed this session and that you will find answers to questions that you may have had. And if you've got additional questions, I'm available. Let me know, and I'll do what I can to give you the best answer that I can. Thanks again for being so patient over the course of the past 2 months. Glad to get back with you, and we're going to resume this thing and should have it wrapped up by the end of February. Until the next time, God bless you, take care of you, and I'll see you in church.